Israel is a law-abiding state. Israel, it is important for us to remain different. We are not like them, and to work and to operate within the bounds of the law. But what needs to be understood is when we are applying the laws of armed conflict, we have to apply the principles to the situation. And here I think there's a bit of misunderstanding. The one allegation that is made or accusation is that Israel is targeting civilians and civilian objects. And this is a misunderstanding of the situation. Israel is not targeting civilians. What it is targeting civilian buildings. But these civilian buildings, and here it's important to understand, are lawful military objectives. Why so? Because according to the laws of war, or IHL, International Humanitarian Law, if a civilian object is used for the military purposes of the enemy, it loses its civilian nature and it becomes a lawful military target. Now, what we need to understand is that the Hamas, all of the Hamas military capabilities and also of the other terrorist organizations like the Islamic Jihad, they are all within civilian structures and underneath civilian structures. They use only civilian infrastructure for all their activity, for storing weapons, for command and control, for firing rockets, for planning their actions against Israel. And that makes these objects lawful targets. So we're not attacking unlawful targets. That's the one point that needs to be understood.
Out that this is under international law. It's lawful to attack these buildings.
It's completely lawful. What isn't lawful is what the Hamas is doing by using civilians as shield and operating from within the civilians. That's another war crime. But what Israel is doing, that is, according to the principle of distinction, completely lawful. The second point, the second principle or rule of law is that you need to, it's called take feasible precautions to minimize harm to civilians. Now, Israel is doing that. It's giving warning as much as possible. Now, the critical word is feasible. There's a difference between an operation when you have time and you can measure and you can give individual warnings that the law doesn't require anywhere, individual warnings, but it could be a feasible precaution and to use very accurate weapons. When we are facing such a war, and we are facing, and I'll come to this in a minute, such a huge threat to our existence, then the feasible precautions are in accordance to the situation. So we are trying, we are warning civilians, we are asking them to leave. The Hamas is preventing them from leaving, again, using them as shields. But that's what we can do to minimize harm. Now, despite this, harm is happening to civilians in Gaza. Now, here's the third and most important principle, is the principle of, most relevant one, the principle of proportionality. Because even when you attack a lawful target, as we are doing, you have to balance between the collateral damage anticipated to civilians and see if it is not excessive in relation to the military advantage expected from the attack. That's the law. So it means you have to do the balancing. The military advantage, by the way, gets the upper hand, because only if the collateral damage is excessive, then it would be an unlawful attack. And here what is critical to understand, yes, many civilians are killed and injured at the moment in the Gaza Strip. This is very sad and unfortunate. It is not in Israel's interest also. We don't want, and the more civilian casualties, it's beyond the legal and moral issue. It's also against our interest. It puts pressure on Israel. So it's definitely not our purpose. It is the purpose of the Palestinians, a lot of the Palestinians, of the Hamas, who's using these Palestinians. But what we have to understand is that when we do this estimate, the military advantage side of it is nothing like before. This is not another operation that we've had a few, the Hamas are firing rockets, which is very, of course, problematic, and it disrupts our lives. But we have
And what is it
shelters.
Different this time, Pnina?
The difference,
what makes it different this
There
time?
are two main differences that make this threat a huge, even existential threat on Israel. The first is that Hamas itself has revealed itself to be an enemy that is much stronger and more sophisticated than we thought. The Hamas managed to enter into Israel thousands of operatives and to actually conquer and hold for quite a while, a few hours, in some places a few days, parts of the state of Israel. We cannot live with the Hamas threat on our borders. So that means that we have to eliminate the military capabilities of the Hamas. And as I explained before, everything is within civilian objects, where civilians live. To do that, there's no chance but, unfortunately, when we attack these targets, and you have to attack all the system, part after part, dismantle it completely. To do that, yes, you have to carry out these attacks. We're seeing the devastation in Gaza Strip, a lot of destruction. That's the only way to get to this military infrastructure, and civilians also get harmed because the military advantage is so huge. This harm, in my view, is not excessive as the law requires. Maybe it's extensive, but it's not excessive, and that means that this is proportionate because this is the balance we have to do. And here I'll add another issue, because that's one of the threats, and I was talking about an existential threat. So Hamas is an existential threat to the south of Israel, that's for sure. But there's another issue. The Hamas has allies. It's been supported by Iran. It's working in cohort with Hezbollah. Iran is also now using its other Shia militias around the world. From Yemen, we already had missiles fired at us. They're waiting for just the word from Iraq, from Syria. Hezbollah is just waiting to see what we'll do. If Israel is conceived as weak, and if Israel is conceived as not be able to, that it doesn't have the ability to confront the Hamas, all these enemies are going to come in, and this could, and I don't want to sound alarmist, and I believe in our strengths, and we have the US as allies, but it is an existential threat. We have to understand that. And when this is the level of the threat, and this is also part of the military consideration, the military advantage of dismantling the Hamas capabilities, again, this impacts how the proportionality analysis is applied. And I'm asking anybody who's listening or seeing our interviews, think if it was your country, it was your people. What would you expect your government to do? Would you expect your government to refrain from actions and leave such an enemy and leave and be perceived as weak and bring in also other enemies because it's to spare the civilians' lives of the other side? I don't think any government of any country would do that, and rightfully so, and the law doesn't require us to commit suicide.